Hey folks, Dr. GC, IU Artifacts. We are trying something new. You are looking at Missouri's arena as it stood in 1999. That's definitely Bob Knight. It's definitely his last season at Indiana. And this is perhaps not the greatest entry point into this, but we wanted to try something different. We're looking back at old moments in IU basketball history.
Mike Davis with the great turtleneck there.
John Treloar is on the bench. Yeah. Jeffrey Newton's getting ready to come into the basketball game. And we're here. It's IU Missouri from the 1999-2000 season. This is an interesting game if you go back and look at it in IU history. This was a game that IU came in ranked 14th. They fell behind immediately and fell behind big. They were down 20 in the first half. They've stormed back here, and they're only down 4 points with about 3 minutes remaining in this contest. And so we're just going to kind of talk through it. We wanted to give some perspective on the players and the moment and things like that. And if you've got comments or anything you want to chime in on, please feel free to use the YouTube comments. We'd love to hear from you. This was an interesting team, this IU team. And, one of the things that we saw in this second half of this game, I think, was the emergence of some defense and some defensive intensity that, frankly, you didn't always see come out of the teams in the 3 or 4 years prior.
Right. We were talking about this earlier, defensive, basic defensive mechanics were absent for a lot of those teams. And, post-1994, you really kind of it's a crapshoot of what you're going to get on the floor on any given night. And, the good thing is
some days you're beating Kansas at home by 20. Some days you're losing to DePaul at home.
Yeah, or athletes in action.
Or athletes in action. Robbie Eggers is coming in and smashing you, yes.
That's right. So
young Kirk Haston. Kirk Haston, redshirt sophomore, had a big breakout time at the end of the previous season, had a really nice game against George Washington. Pretty good game here.
Right.
We'll just hit that free throw for his 13th point on the evening. We're starting to see Haston come into his own a little bit here.
Right. This is, he was Lobelville, Tennessee native, very small town, had a very tumultuous season. This was the year his mother died, and that there's tornadoes that went through the area, so obviously a hard season for him, but he's emerging as a player, and you're going to really see that shine the next year with Mike Davis as the first season. But you kind of – this is a transition year because you're seeing Guyton and Michael Lewis leaving, and then Dane Fife kind of coming into his own. There's Lewis
not hitting a three.
Yeah, we love you, Mike, but that was never his forte.
Yeah, probably a reason he was open there.
Yeah.
But interesting that this is the lineup. You see Luke Jimenez on the
Jared
Odell, Lynn Washington,
and then there's Coverdale enjoying his bench minutes for the year.
And Tom Geyer on the very end of the bench too.
Yeah.
It's a period of time for IU where if you were there and you were paying attention and you weren't predisposed to thinking that the program had gone completely into the toilet, it felt like a transition period out of, a dark era for IU. And it wasn't the first time that it happened in IU. I mean, you can look at that period of time from like 76, 77 to 79, 80, and it wasn't too dissimilar.
Right.
The difference here, I think, is that, the people have lost patience largely, and then a lot of it was due to the increased media attention on Bob Knight and some of the antics that surrounded that.
Right, and we had great talent on this team. Guyton, was really the go-to guy, and so much to see, especially from the last season. We were talking earlier about Fife's contributions and how he kind of is beginning to become that player, the Mr. Basketball in Michigan that we expect him to. Yeah. Terrible pass there, but
this was not a very disciplined Missouri team.
No, and we're going to see Quinn Snyder's first season here in Missouri is kind of a unique situation. You were talking about going to this, being in this arena, and we said it was no longer around. Is that true?
I don't think it is.
Right.
Or it had just been built. I mean,
okay.
But it's an interesting environment, and certainly some athletes on this Missouri team. We see Kareem Rush here of all players going. If you pay attention to college basketball, was definitely a prominent name for all the wrong reasons during this time period.
Absolutely.
But a rough time for Missouri basketball coming out of the Norm Sloan era, the Norm Stewart era. Sorry, not Norm Sloan coached at North Carolina State. But they had a couple of free throws there. IU's down 2 once again. The lineup on the floor here is interesting. You got Guyton, you got Lewis, you got Jeff Newton, who doesn't get talked about that much as like a crunch time guy, but he was only a sophomore.
He was a sophomore
in this season, and yet he's playing major minutes. Largely, I think, because of his athleticism and his ability to rebound.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was when Leach was still academically ineligible as a big man. He was. I mean, I remember. And there's
that's just a great move by Haston.
If you were able to watch Haston this year or next year, you're going to see that signature hook move. And when he added his outside shot, there's a reason why he was drafted in the first round of the NBA, and it didn't work out in terms of his career. He had some injuries,
knee injuries.
Yeah, his knees were. That was a troublesome. But going back to Leach, he was so highly praised by Knight, and yet never saw the floor in many ways because of his academic concerns. There's Quinn Snyder. We just saw the minute ago there.
Now, my dad recorded this, and he edits all the ads out, so we don't get the customary time to talk about things. But you see Haston there with the great move. You hadn't seen that out of most IU players the previous few seasons. Andre Patterson certainly wasn't making those kinds of moves.
Jason Collier wasn't either.
And was that a foul or a travel there? I think it was a travel.
Yeah. Tie ball game, crunch time here.
Yeah, this is big. So, who do you want to take? You don't have to take a last shot here. You got a 35-second shot clock, but
yeah,
this was one of the issues. Now, this year you didn't feel as bad about it because you did have Guyton who could come off of screens and hit shots. And one of the things that made this team different was that he wasn't the only guy that had to take the shots,
sure.
whereas that was kind of the case in the previous couple of years.
Was this the season that Guyton hit the shot against Temple? To hit
no, that was the previous season.
Okay, but it was a great move there.
Nice, and Dane Fife able to lay it.
Yeah. And notice the jerseys, folks. It's
you're really bothered by these jerseys.
I'm an Artifacts guy, and obviously, and so these jerseys being that shiny material has always bothered me, and I don't know how a traditionalist like Knight would have allowed it, but he may not have had much of a say in it. But you can also notice with those terrible,
nice play
by. Was that guy?
That was Nate. That was Newton.
Yeah.
And it gets it to Lewis. Yeah, but you're
missing. Yeah.
The branding was off at this point.
It was. Yeah.
Of course, you had the evil oval going on at the same time with football. There was a lot. There was a lot not right with IU branding and athletics during this time period.
Everybody was doing their own thing.
Quinn Snyder, looking like he might have ingested some substances. He had a rough 3 years or so in Columbia.
Yeah, he did.
So Mike Lewis at the line,
and honestly, nobody better at the line.
Yeah, he
was so good.
As much as he struggled sometimes with the jump shot, the free throws were not an issue at all.
And now IU's up by 3. A pretty big turnaround.
Jared Odell's having fun over there on the bench.
Yeah. If we don't see Odell in his breakout game against Duke yet, quite.
That's 2 years away.
Yeah, 2 years away.
And there was still question about why did we recruit Jared Odell?
Yeah.
But there were a lot of guys like that. And Tom Coverdale hadn't emerged. Jared Odell hadn't emerged. You mentioned George Leach hadn't really emerged.
Right.
It's fascinating when you look at this team how many pieces would end up being on that national championship losing team 2 years later.
Right.
And to think that, you're going to lose Guyton, you're going to lose Lewis, but
you're not going to have Haston either.
But Haston could have been there.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the fascinating thing,
Right.
This was a really nice feed there. That was as good of a layup move as that was from Fife. That was really good court vision. Off the double team there by Haston.
I remember Haston he had great hands and he could pass, and that was one of his underrated skills.
Yeah, but it is interesting. You think about that. This was really, at its core, a very young team.
Yeah,
and I think that gets lost sometimes in the last 6 years of Bob Knight always get kind of chunked in as that was a bad last 6 years, and the general had gone downhill. If you look at this team through the lens of being a young team with a couple of senior guards, this was a really good collection of talent.
Yeah, that was not good.
That was really bad defense.
That was bad. There was a total breakdown, and I'm sure Knight was not pleased with that.
But that was the MO of these teams. It was really, and we'll get to this if we do any games from later in this particular season. But the game at Minnesota from this year is a great example where they're up 6 with a minute left. That was the infamous Joel Przybilla game where they end up losing the game they have no business losing. You can see what's going on here. Just Mike Lewis gets caught in no man's land because nobody jumps on the penetrating ball handler, and Lewis can't leave the three-point shooter in the corner open there.
Right.
We forgot Kyle Hornsby, also on this team, was also on the team 2 years later.
Yep. It's an interesting dynamic because, like you said, it is that transition. You have guys that are going to play such pivotal roles. We think about Coverdale's on the bench. We haven't even seen him in this game.
Right.
And yet he's the guy that really is the guy on that 2001-2002 team that made it that as far as it did with 2 bad ankles.
Yeah. So crucial inbounds pass here for this IU team.
As soon as he inbounds it, he is the guy they would like to have at the free throw line. Nobody guarding Lewis for Missouri.
And they bring Luke Jimenez in on this possession,
right,
which kind of gives you a sense of how personnel poor this team was in the backcourt.
Yeah, and Jimenez was a walk-on. He played quality minutes, but he would. And honestly, if you think about back, there's Haston getting an earful from Knight, but Jimenez played meaningful minutes during his career at IU.
Yeah.
And for a walk-on, that's pretty significant. We don't think about guys like Kevin Lemmy or Jean Paul.
I mean, Jimenez. He's not nearly as good of a defensive player but there's a little Zach McRoberts factor there with Jimenez.
The glue guy. And there's your guy that if you want Lewis and you want Guyton on the
With all due respect, he was a marvelous offensive player. He just took a lot off the table defensively. Nice job by Haston there to grab that rebound. Foul comes in, and that's basically the ball game.
Yeah, but, I mean, what a turnaround considering the odds that they were facing earlier in the game, and I know that's a good road win for Knight especially.
Yeah, no, and particularly, I mean, look, it's a 14th-ranked team. I mean, they had gotten off to some really bad starts in the previous couple of years. I think that at one point – I think it was in the 96-97 season. They started 5-4 or something like that. They lost to Kentucky. They lost a couple of games in a preseason tournament. It was a real struggle for them in these early season games sometimes. And this team, even though with the free throw gets missed there, you could tell that there was something different already about this team, that they would have the fortitude to come back in a game like this as far down as they were and pick up the victory.
Yeah, a lot of adversity considering, what's going to happen. But, at this point they have it together for the most part, and that's good.
Yeah.
It's refreshing to see because, we knew about what was happening, the departures that had happened the previous season, but we weren't sure really what the inevitability was. And we were talking earlier about that Pepperdine game at the end of the season and just how kind of everything came crashing down.
I've still never watched that game again. That's the one. I've watched the Duke game from '92 again. I've never watched the Pepperdine game again. I was there. I was in person. That was enough. But, no, great win by Indiana in this contest, an important road win against a Big 12 opponent. You can see great game by Kirk Haston, 17 and 5, 60% shooting from the field. And that was a harbinger of things to come, both this season and the season that followed it. So, anyway, we'll be back later on with more of these.
Yeah, this is good.
And we'll bring some other people in. I know my Crimson Cast partner Scott Caulfield's been after me to do some of this stuff for a while now, so we'll get him involved as well. But thanks to all you folks for listening. For IU Artifacts, I'm Dr. GC. We'll catch you on the flip side.